Hello everyone, welcome back. It's stream day again. I managed to make one happen, and today we are going to be making monsters. This is like the second or third thing that I did a Daggerheart-compatible or Daggerheart-related design stream about, so it's fun to be back on this. I know that a lot of people have been really enjoying the Menagerie of Mayhem with the first volume that released earlier this year, so I knew that I wanted to generate some more material to make it so that Menagerie number 2 is not terribly far away. Though I must say, I have a lot of projects in various stages right now, most of which I can't talk about, but I was just in a meeting for one of them, and whoo, we are cooking some amazing Daggerheart compatible design in one of those projects, and you're going to get to know more about that very soon if you are a subscriber over on my Patreon at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood. I'm going to type that out, but it's hard to write and it's hard to talk and type at the same time. If you're a patron, you already have heard a little bit about the project that I'm thinking about, but in a couple of weeks, we'll have a more public announcement, and then I'll have a lot to say about it. So that is all very cool. I want to say thank you to Genghis Stray for following the channel. Thank you to JR Tomps for subscribing with Prime, and thank you to Not a Hag for contributing to the Cult's Totem. Cheers. I'm going to mute myself while I drink. I think I finally realized why contribute to the Cult's Totem is a thing on this channel. Several years ago, I played Cult of the Lamb, the video game, on stream, and there is a Twitch plug-in or streamer mode for that, and I'm pretty sure my channel has just permanently had the stuff from that stream plug-in or the streamer mode, and that is why there is a contribute to the Cult's Totem thing, right? When playing Cult of the Lamb, there is an output for that. But I'm not playing Cult of the Lamb, so instead the output is that I drink water, which is also very good and important to me because hydration is important. We've got a lot of people here, so hello to Alan Tucker. Hi to Junk Rabbit. And Alan says, finally getting back into the swing of things after a big move like yourself. I remember some of that, and I'm glad that you're back into the swing of things. I know you've got Fractus moving along. I saw an update about that not too long ago, which is very exciting. Hello to Etten Entertainment and to Jaybird Things. So great to see all of you here. As you can see, I have some notes on ideas for adversary design. Hello, NSman. Yes, so before streaming, I wanted to at least give myself a couple of basic notes to start from so that I didn't just have a blank page when I was starting the stream of we're going to design adversaries, and then I make a cricket sound, right? Instead, I have some places to start. I'm also very excited to take any suggestions or requests that folks may have in terms of things to add. Almost anything that you see here today, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to end up in Menagerie of Mayhem Volume 2. And if it doesn't end up there, it will probably have ended up in something that will show up even sooner. Because I know that I want to do more volumes of the Menagerie. The trick is that I spent some time reaching out to people to investigate relationships and collaborations, because something I found when I was working on the Daggerheart core book as a freelancer was that the collaboration and getting to work with Spencer and Rowan and everybody else at Darrington Press was really exciting and energizing for me to have that short, rapid back and forth. Because before working in game design, I was a novelist, right? I have written novels. I continue to do some writing, right? But I was already established as a novelist, and all of those novels were written individually. And then I co-wrote the series Born to the Blade with 3 colleagues, right? The collaboration there was great, but all my other fiction was pretty limited in terms of collaboration, right? I would write the draft, I would send it to my agent, I would send it to my editor. I would get notes from one or both of them. I would address those notes, and then I would send something back and it would be published. Versus Daggerheart, working on Daggerheart, there were calls, there was working on stuff in documents and having comments and sending comments back and forth and talking in like a Slack type thing, and just a lot of really short loop feedback and collaboration, which I found just so great and so fun. It's a big part of why I wanted to keep working in game design, is chasing some of that feeling. And now in some of the partnerships that I have built or am building, I'm getting the chance to do things like that. So I was just on a call with some colleagues working on a thing that we're all doing together. And so I have that collaboration. Hi. Hello, Adventure Lies Ahead. I hope you have the best of luck in fixing that leak. We had a leak in our apartment that was just fixed last week. So I can both sympathize and empathize and wish you the best of luck. Alan Tucker says collaboration is the best. True story. So I grabbed the text for the Grinning Wolf Rider out of Menagerie number 1 so that I would have a little bit of a template for the new adversaries. But because that is already laid out, when I pull it directly into Word, it looks a little wonky. And I just don't have a separate document open that has kind of unformatted stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to make it bigger a couple of times, and we're going to go from there. We have a hydrate from Eton Entertainment, so I'm going to do that. Okay. All of that now said, I'm going to give myself a fresh intro just in case I need it. Today, we are going to do some new adversary design for foes to be used with the Daggerheart rules, right? As with so many of our streams, we are utilizing the Darrington Press Community Gaming license for Daggerheart. None of what I'm designing or talking about here is on behalf of or speaking for Darrington Press, Critical Role, those folks. I'm just talking for myself, expressing my own experiences and my own perspectives, the way that I see how design can and or should work. Where is our little logo? Oh, that's this thing. Here's my compatible logo. Great. So we're going to make some adversaries today. Here are some thoughts that I had down. What if I added more to the Grinning Legion, right? The Grinning Legion in Menagerie number 1 is the Grinning Wolf Rider, which is a standard, like a goblin type, a goblin or gnome or halfling on a wolf with like a spear. And then the Grinning Legion mob, which is a horde type adversary. So we can do more of them to have some tier 1 adversaries. I want to add to my other faction the Congregation of the End, which is like a higher tier nihilistic death cult, somewhat inspired by something like the Whispered One from the Critical Role Campaign 1 with Vox Machina. But there are a lot of touchstones for that kind of a vibe. I thought that it might be useful to just make a tier 1 villager, right? Like in D&D 5e, there is the commoner stat block. There have definitely been times when it would have been useful to just be able to reference that. And I imagine that other designers have made something like that. The thing for me is if I have one of my own, then I can always just refer back to that one and design with it in mind. Versus even if someone else has a really good commoner stat block or like villager stat block, because I'm going to be making a bunch of different Daggerheart things, if I can make it a little easier for someone to run or use material that I've generated because the only other things they need are other books that I've made, that's going to be better, right? I would love stuff to be as self-contained as possible, but There are places where I'm going to want to build on existing design that I've done because I'm really proud of that design. And I think that being able to build on that design lets me achieve things that I couldn't otherwise. So there's a future where in 2 years, when the Menagerie of Mayhem collection has been published, and I've published a collection of environments where those 2 books refer to each other and form something of a foundation for a lot of the creator-owned Daggerheart-compatible design that I do. So that's a little bit of a look into the future. And then I was thinking, so something I've noticed is once we get to tier 3 or above in adversaries, in the core book specifically, we're moving away from like just a person, right? The humanoid enemies become a little bit less common above tier 3. And there are some campaign frames like Five Banners Burning or Witherwild to a lesser extent, but especially Five Banners Burning, that's a very like, this is about people kind of a campaign frame. It would be really useful to have like a tier 3 or tier 4 adversary that's like, what if a dude was really good at swords, right? What if there was a lady with a big hammer and she was just the biggest badass in all of the realm, right? Maybe she does magic, but mostly it's what if there was a giant woman with a hammer? So this leads to the idea of a sword saint, right? What if we took a spell blade and made them a tier 3 or tier 4 foe, right? What if instead of John or Jane Q spellblade at tier 1, we made Daggerheart's fantasy version of Miyamoto Musashi, right? What if we made an anime swordmaster character kind of adversary to go into, to be used with the Daggerheart rules, right? And so sword saint stuff, if we're explicitly thinking about magic, you know, a badass sword fighter with magic, or badass sword fighting that's so powerful that it feels like magic, we can do some really cool out there things. And so why don't we go ahead and start with our sword saint? And this is going to be a tier 3. So the question I have to myself is, do we want to make them a solo? Do we want to make them a leader? Do we want to make them a standard adversary where it's just like at tier 3, you're going to be fighting people who are pretty cool, right? They've got their own awesome stuff going on. The upside of doing standard is then we could also have like a faction of like super martial artists, right? We could have sword saint, we can have bowmaster, right? Bang, 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 across different styles. So, let's start with the standard version, and I reserve the right to change my mind and come back around and make them a leader or a solo type. Okay. So I'm just going to space down long enough that I can start to scroll. Yes, here we go. Great. Sword Saint. So this is a legendary warrior with fencing skills that go far beyond and mortal skill. Alan Tucker says, adventures or encounters where the party comes up against another band of adventurers are often really fun. Agreed. I built some some adversaries designed to be rivals that scale with the party that I've posted work in progress versions on my Patreon. And I think an expanded version of that is probably going to be like a bedrock or a foundational element in Menagerie Volume 2. Because what I think I would want to do is write out 4 versions of the rivals, or something I've seen other people do is put little icons by some of the features that are basically that say, oh, this feature only applies when this adversary shows up at tier 3 or higher, right? So you can give the full tier 4 stat block and then show what should be redacted when you scale them back down. There's a few ways of doing that, but it's something I'm interested in exploring. Jaybird Thing says, standard feels like the move here, IMO, so I'm glad that we are in agreement. So, a legendary world with warrior with fencing skills that go far beyond mortal prowess. Motives and tactics. So this would be press the advantage, flurry of blows, seek out the strongest adversaries, and defeat them. Right? My vibes here are, this is Miya Musashi by way of Ryu from Street Fighter, right? We have this incredible swords person who is just out there to be the very best. So by the time the PCs are tier 3, they are probably famous enough that a swordsman be like, I'm going to test myself against the party's warrior, ranger, seraph, who knows, right? Whichever character is like the most sword fightery. And that gives me an idea for test. Although this unfortunately pretty much immediately creates a environment. So an idea for one of the features for this adversary could be spend 2 fear and target a PC within close. The Sword Saint issues them a challenge to a one-on-one duel. If the PC refuses, they must mark 2 stress and you gain 2 fear. We want to have some kind of limitation on this so they can't just spam it, because if you spend 2 fear and then they lose stress and you gain those 2 fear back, then as long as you can keep making moves, right, you would have to do this. So this is going to probably be once per scene, right? Once per scene. And then we unbold this. I'm not going to worry too much about formatting, except where it annoys me that the formatting isn't right. Jaybird Thing says, I'm working on something similar-ish with villains that can be reworked into rivals, but scaling isn't something I'm exploring in that project. Sounds cool. Yeah, I've seen some other folks do things along those lines, and something I had been hoping we would see, and I am seeing, is as more people get into Daggerheart-compatible design, individual people have really good ideas that people should take inspiration from. Right? Wherever possible, you want to, credit other people if you're using something that is, I'm just using your idea. But if you take some inspiration and then go off in your own way, ideally you give some credit, but then you're also going further and doing your own thing, which is what I would want to do in this kind of a situation. So that is one feature. We're jumping back and forth here. Looking at the SRD, let's give ourselves some benchmarks and thoughts about adversaries at tier 3. So let's find as tier 3 standard. I think that's going to be like a vampire and a stag knight. Yeah, so a stag knight is difficulty 17, thresholds 1936, HP 7, stress 5, attack plus 3, melee weapon, 3d8 plus 3 damage. The Stag Knight has a reputation of being a pretty tough foe, so I think they are a decent benchmark, but we maybe pull back on some of these things or think about different ways of making this character scary. So looking at thresholds, I'm going to compare the Stag Knight to a couple of other adversaries, right? 1936 for the Stag Knight is the same as a Hydra, which is 1935, but the Hydra is meant to mark HP and then regenerate. So that might be okay. If we look over at the Vampire, they are 1835. The Vault Guardian Jailer is 1933, right? They're a little bit tougher at Major because they're like a robot. And then a Vault Guardian Sentinel is a bruiser at 2140. So if we do 1836, I feel pretty okay about that. We're going to give them 6 hit points, and I think we're going to give them 4 or 5 stress because we want to have some cool abilities that will cost stress. They are going to have a +4 attack, which is higher than average, but they're a Sword Saint. So this is going to be Wind Blade. Close. So one of the things that they have is they just have a magic weapon that lets them attack at close range, right? This is something that we see in anime. We could say that we see it in like Legend of Zelda, right? When you have the Master Sword and you either have full HP or it's charged up, you could just like shoot energy with the sword. That's very cool. We should do that. D8s for damage on a standard adversary is okay, right? It's not too high, but this is a standard foe. If we're sticking with that, they're not necessarily going to be on the high scale for DPS. What they should do, maybe instead of having their base damage be as high, we want to have 1 or 2 really cool features where they can do something that is more powerful, right? Like a special technique, a skull breaker strike kind of thing. So we have Test Your Might. We should add some more text here about what a duel is. I don't know whether there is a duel environment in Hope and Fear. That would be pretty cool if there is. I don't remember seeing any text about it in the stuff they've previewed. So I'm just going to assume that there isn't one, and we're going to have to figure out the mechanics on our own, right? Or I make a note to put a duel mechanic either into this book or into something else, right? I wouldn't want a stat block to be so reliant on a different book. There's like, look at this other book for a duel environment. Like I don't want to do that if I can avoid it at all possible. If they accept the PC and the Sword Saint agree to terms for the duel. If the PC wins, they gain 3 hope. If the Sword Saint wins, gain 3 fear. If the PC survives, win or lose, they can exchange 1 domain card in their loadout for another card of equal or lower level. The idea here being that if you survive a duel against a Sword Saint, you're going to learn something, right? So that you could change out a domain card. This is especially thinking about the warrior class and the guardian class, and then potentially the brawler class if it's added to the SRD, or there's like a supplemental SRD after Hope and Fear comes out. We don't have official confirmation of exactly what updates to the SRD are going to be made, so I don't want to rely on it, but I'm hoping that that's the case. But this is I want this to be a fun thing, especially for the more swordsy kind of characters in your party, where somebody shows up, and then just by them showing up, they shine spotlight on a particular player character, right? I want to duel you. You are a worthy foe to me, right? It's not they want to fight the whole group necessarily, but maybe they can. And if they're only fighting one PC, a standard adversary can, when written right, probably be an okay challenge for one PC. The other thing to figure out, and this gets more into environment design, is like, what are the other PCs doing while this one PC is dueling a Sword Saint? We don't necessarily have to address that question now, because that's probably more the thing that would be taken care of by writing a larger encounter where it's, duel with the Sword Saint is the encounter. Here's the Sword Saint stat block. Here's a stat block for a duel environment. And it gives some of the process, how it gets started, the terms of the duel, what other people can do, and the narrative and mechanical outputs. We are trying to do all of that, but condense it as much as possible so that a GM can look at this and be like, oh, this would be fun, and have enough to then figure out the rest, right? So, and then let's go. We're going to do our experiences alphabetically. So even though fencing is the higher rated experience, it is going to be listed second. So we have difficulty 17, thresholds 1836, HP 6, stress 4. So we want to have some features that require stress, right? Riposte, reaction. When a PC, right, misses this or fails, right? Fails on an attack roll against the Saint, mark a stress to make a wind blade attack against them with advantage. Right? This would mean that at least 4 times you roll against the Saint, you fail, the Saint counterattacks you, right? They riposte. And the idea there can be that part of why you fail, why you didn't hit them, is that they were able to counter strike, counter thrust, right? So I know enough about sword fighting to get really granular about this. But the thing that I want to do here is pull back to action storytelling level, right? Where I want the feeling of emotional engagement, but I don't necessarily need to be like, well, is this a single tempo response or is this a double tempo response? Because if it's a counter thrust, then XYZQ. If it inspires a fun idea, then yeah, that's cool to go with, right? Riposte, the classical definition as I understand it, not being especially trained in the collegiate or Olympic fencing style, but knowing a fair amount about historical European styles, right? Riposte is the second thing. Parry, riposte. First tempo parry, second tempo riposte. If this were a counter thrust technique, it would probably do something to the attack. And so because this is a master, let's say that they do, right? Counter thrust reaction. When a creature within close makes an attack roll against the Saint, force them to re-roll and take the new result. If they fail, the Saint deals 3d12 plus 3. So the idea here is that the Sword Saint is such a good fighter that they see your attack, they counter thrust into it, possibly defeating your attack and hitting you in response, right? Because you make them reroll, and if they fail, you just hit them. The Saint just deals damage to them. We don't need to make another attack because a counter thrust succeeding means that the attacker didn't hit, and then they can hit. You can do a counter thrust that can foul an attack without landing the blow yourself, right? At that point, it's just a parry that succeeded but didn't turn into a counterattack, right? And there's some wibbly wobbliness to that. If you are a trained collegiate / Olympic and or historical fencer in the chat, and you're unhappy about me being simplistic about things, let's just think about the audience. And if you are, and I don't know that you are, let's talk, because I want more sword friends. And Usman says, I have never touched a sword in my life, so I believe anything you say. Well, you don't need to believe anything, but we'll be fine. So what makes this really cool? So this should require marking a stress. That's where we started out. 2. So we have a counter thrust. When a creature within close makes an attack roll against the Saint, mark a stress to force them to re-roll and take the new result. If they fail, the Saint deals 3d12 plus 3 physical damage to them. But we can make this even more specific. When a creature within close succeeds on an attack roll against the Saint, mark the stress to force them to re-roll and take the new result. Right? You as the GM get to wait until the player character has landed the blow, or until the player character is like, yes, I have succeeded. Then, because they are a sword saint, you mark a stress and say, as your blow comes in, the sword saint kind of reaches out with their wind blade and counter thrusts, trying to foil your attack. You need to re-roll the attack and take the new result. That could be they foul the attack that you described and you have to make a new one, because when we make an action roll, it doesn't always have to be only one individual discrete motion. An attack roll in Daggerheart can be met with, or can be expressed, can be the mechanical manifestation of a description like, I charge into battle, swinging my sword with wild abandon, trying to hack away at the horde. That's an attack roll, right? I describe that and the GM says, cool, make an attack roll against this horde type adversary. Especially against hordes and minions, you make one roll and that can lead to defeating several individuals within the scene, right? So we want the fiction and the mechanics to stay pretty tightly woven, right? There's no reason that you can't also have an attack against an individual be the mechanical manifestation of a description that is, so this sword saint is a hot stick. I'm going to show them what a real swordswoman, what a real fencer is like, but I'm going to start by testing their defenses. So I approach with precision and caution, and I'm going to test their defenses with a few probing strikes. Okay, make an attack roll. Boom, boom, boom. You get the roll, and they say, okay. Well, you can tell that this person is an expert fencer because on this, the second strike that you throw would be on target, would land, but you see that they counter thrust, trying to foil your attack and turn defense into attack back against you. I need you to re-roll your attack roll. And then if the attack roll still succeeds, you hit the sword saint, right? You responded to their counter thrust and beat them. But if you re-roll and fail, one of the things that comes from that is that the sword saint hits you with the counter thrust. Because this is a reaction feature, the GM could theoretically make a separate move because of the failure on the roll, because the counter thrust hitting you is just the natural consequence of what has already been established within the fiction. If you wanted to, you could just say, I made you fail on this roll, and so the consequence I'm going to inflict is the Sword Saint hits you with the counter thrust. That is totally fine, right? Daggerheart is a very interpretive game, right? We talk about we in the community of designers, right? The field and in the community of players talk about rules over rulings. Darrington folks have talked about rules over rulings. So all of that is fine. For this case, I think you want to be enough of a challenge that you would do both. But that's going to be one thing. So we have a cool, more social kind of feature in Test Your Might. We have this reaction that really shows how incredibly skilled they are. I think we want probably a passive and or another action feature, right? Some kind of special attack feature. Right, the Saint can jump up to a close range as part of their movement. Right, here we are taking inspiration from hero, myth, and legend. We are taking inspiration from Xianxia, Chanbara, so on and so forth, Wuxia. The Sword Saint can just jump around real good. Right? Maybe they're a fawn. Maybe they're just really good at jumping. Right? Our text says fencing skills that go beyond mortal prowess. We could probably do something even more than that, right? Up to or run along a vertical surface, right? This Sword Saint can wall run because that's cool as hell. And then we want some kind of like ultimate technique feature. Right? Perfect strike. So ultimate techniques can take a bunch of different forms, right? The perfect strike would be something like spend some number of fear and select a target within close, and then you just deal damage to them because the perfect strike always succeeds. That doesn't give as much of a way for the player character to interact back with the Sword Saint, because it's just, as long as the GM has fear and they get a move, it's just perfect strike one after another. So maybe instead of perfect strike, right? Strike with the expertise of 10,000 repetitions. Right, so this is the quote, basically that says, like, I'm more afraid of a person who has practiced one technique 10,000 times than somebody who has practiced 10,000 techniques once. Right, we're getting across the excellence of repetition and long practice. But that can just be a tactic. This is the kind of motive or tactic entry that I like including because it suggests how to roleplay or how to pilot this kind of adversary in a way that I think can then lead to a GM improvising moves with more confidence. And even if it doesn't reach that level, what it does is it helps inform how a GM would give description, right? When the Sword Saint makes their strikes, you can see that there is no hesitation. There is no wasted motion. It is as if they have done this exact flow 10,000 times. And as, describing for the other player characters who aren't in the duel, as you watch the saint move, it is like they are performing a kata, but instead of it being on their own, there's somebody on the other side, right? That the motions are so assured that it's as if they are in like this prepared form. So instead, I want to go for ultimate strike. So with ultimate strike, what I'm separating out the fear cost here so that the GM can have the Sword Saint try the ultimate strike a couple of times until they succeed, right? On a success, up to twice per scene, spend 2 fear to inflict 3d20 plus 20 physical and magical damage. Right? Ultimate strike. This attack can deal massive damage. The other way that I could express this is if this attack deals severe damage, the target must mark 1 additional hit point. Right. But for me, I think it's more flavorful to say this attack can deal massive damage. Depending on what editor I work with for this book, they might convince me to use another wording. Thank you, Junkrabbit. $3d20 plus 20 maxes out at 80 damage. If the Sword Saint lands a critical, which, if they have advantage, is more likely, then they would deal 80 damage plus 3d20. Right, so it's like it becomes very easy for them to deal massive damage with this ultimate strike, but they can only use it twice per scene. I had thought about making this once per scene. The thing is, if they can do it more than once, there is a real chance that the Sword Saint will just beat you, right? You really have to bring it to win in a duel against the Sword Saint. If you're fighting a Sword Saint like 4v1, right? Your party is fighting a Sword Saint. The fact that they can do 2 ultimate strikes is very dangerous, but they're not going to be able to take out the whole party because 4 is bigger than 2. Now, if there are 4 Sword Saints, then yeah, maybe that becomes a problem. But I think the fantasy I want to express here is just, what if a person was just so good at swords? What if they were a martial artist of such prowess that it, 1, becomes magical, and 2, is a worthy challenge for a tier 3 player character, right? I could see a world where we turn this into tier 4. You know, we make a couple of other tweaks and it's just like, oh yeah, this Sword Saint is the greatest swords person in the world. At which point maybe they become a solo instead. But Ryu after Street Fighter 2 or 3, but with sword, is I think the level that I'm targeting here. I could go longer, but because this is a standard adversary, I actually want to stop here. They have 4 features, which is not too many. If they were a solo or a leader, but especially a solo, I might make space for them to have more features, but because we're doing a standard, and because I'm trying to be really good about practicing the design principles, right? We want to streamline, we want to limit cognitive load. I have so much fun designing adversaries and environments that it's really easy for me to give every stat block 4, 5, 6 features, because I can come up with more interesting different things. And when I do it that way, I just expect that a GM who's using them is going to bring their own editorial eye, and they're going to use this list of features like a menu to draw from. It's more like a buffet and less like a prefix, right? If you treat a stat block like a prefix that you have to use everything exactly when it says to be used, then a larger stat block becomes more daunting and more exhausting to use because you're looking for all the reaction triggers. You're trying to fit in all of the different places where the different actions apply. You're trying to remember all of the passives all at the same time. I can set myself a higher challenge, but if I'm making material that I want to be really widely usable, it behooves me to keep cognitive load in mind and try to limit that where I can. So that's a draft of a Sword Saint. It's pretty cool. We are going to go almost to the whole other end of the spectrum. And now I want to make a villager. So the first question is, are they a standard type adversary or are they a social type adversary? I'm inclined to have them be standard, but then give them at least one social feature and an experience that is relevant to something that's relevant to a social situation, right? Not just an experience that would apply in a combat context, right? An everyday member of the populace with their own hopes and dreams. Jimbo Chicken says, Bastion of Hope rules. Thank you. I'm letting the universe take the reins, and the powerful artifact in the inciting incident will be a Mad Libs a la core rulebook for the party to fill out. That is a cool idea. I really dig it. Bastion of Hope is one of the things that I have been working on because there is more to come for Bastion of Hope. Both because I really like it and because the response has been very, very positive. So thank you for being a part of that very positive response to the frame. Okay, so villager. We're probably going to have a lot fewer, right? For a villager, I probably want 2 to 3 features max. They are going to be difficulty 10. We are going to have, right, a motive / tactic that shows up in the kind of the guards group. Bladed guards, archer guards, guard captain, or head guard. I remember the name right now. I'd have to go look it up in the SRD. Like where did that end up? Boop 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 boop. Anyway, maybe they're in tier 2. One of the motives and tactics is just get through the day, right? And the thing that I want to emphasize with this stat block is that a villager may not be a major player in the story of your campaign, but they are a person, right? They are as much a person as your player character is. Just because the story is not dramatizing their inner life in a big way does not mean that they're not a person whose life has worth. So the thing that I want to convey, one of the things I want to convey with this stat block is to remind the GM and the players, hey, this is a person too, right? They may only be a bit player in this scene or in this overall campaign, but their death is going to matter to a number of people if something bad happens to them. So experiences, right? Any given villager is probably going to have notable experience in some trade or craft, right? So I could here just write blacksmith +2. I'm going for something that's a bit more generic because I'm not writing a blacksmith stat block. I'm trying to pull back even to something that's a bit more broadly usable, because anybody can improvise a villager or townsperson. What I want to try and do is, can I come up with a really good baseline template that someone can just fall back on, and it's going to save them some time and effort. However, they're just a person, so their damage thresholds are very low. They only have 3 hit points, probably have only 2 or 3 stress, right? A villager can be killed in 1 dangerous blow. It's not that hard. Any given villager could also be tougher, but if we're thinking about them from a narrative standpoint, they are a person, but people can die easily, especially in a scary fantasy world, right? So we're kind of balancing these things back and forth. Attack, -2, spear, right? Or improvised weapon, melee, 1d4 +1. Right? This is not a scary person to fight. In Menagerie Volume 1, I have a stat block for possessed townfolk. Those are more dangerous. 1, because they're a horde, and 2, because they're possessed, right? The possessed townfolk have a difficulty of 11, attack of +0, thresholds of 5 and 11, 6 hit points, 2 stress, and clubs and pitchforks that deal 1d8 +2. That's because it's a bigger group. Just a person who is a villager is not as much of a threat, right? One could have a tier 1 horde that is angry townsfolk, and I considered doing that instead of possessed townsfolk. And if you wanted to make an angry townsfolk adversary, I think that's totally reasonable, right? This is meant to be just any given person. But what are their features going to be? So I want a feature that's basically something along the lines of, if you attack this person, everybody in the village is going to know, and they're going to respond to it, right? right, so this is what we're getting toward. This is the social dimension, right? The PCs are going to become shunned. And then shunned PCs, right? A shunned character has disadvantage on all social roles within the community of the aggrieved. But that's not all, because I want to build on what we have, right? Social fabric establishes that if you just attack a villager, you're going to get shunned. But that's not the only way in which you can get in trouble with a local, with any given community. Spend a fear to describe how a PC's actions or lack thereof offend, break a local custom or taboo. Nope, we're not using that word. That is a very culturally specific word that's become genericized, and I'm going to try to avoid it. Break a local custom and draw the town's ire. The PC becomes faux pas is also good. Yep. Right. I think break a local custom is probably okay on its own. Right. I could say describe how a PC makes a faux pas. That's probably fine too. Becomes shunned until they can smooth things over. If this is, right, if a big misunderstanding comes earlier in the stat block and also references shunned, it should be where the shunned status is defined, right? If we have yet a third feature that talks about the shunned status, I would move it up again, but I don't know that we need that. Right, so the GM can spend fear to have there be a misunderstanding, and one person gets shunned, and then you have to do something about it. Or if a PC attacks or intimidates a villager, everybody gets shunned, right? And then you're gonna have a hard time in the village. But there's an other side to this, right? If they're a villager in a fantasy adventure campaign, bad things are going to happen, and the villagers need somebody to step in. And I like coming up with fun quotes, references, and or names for features. So this is holding out for a hero. Maybe this is also an action. Describe. No. The villager shares news of a threat or obstacle facing the community and entreats the PCs for their help. Entreats for help, and I don't want to look up the definition of entreats, so I'm just going to use the simpler word for now. If the party completes this quest, they each gain a hope and a handful of gold as the town celebrates their feats. Right? Now, this villager has a few different ways that they can be used. So for me, It Takes a Village should be the feature that speaks more about the social fabric of the community, right? Like it Takes a Village could also be a feature that talks about like when you work with the villagers together to address a challenge, XYZ. Here, this makes me think of the role-playing game Stone Top, which has been kind of in the discussion lately because it's finally fulfilling. It was on Quinn's Quest, things like that. But yeah, I did think about It Takes a Village as a feature name for what it became social fabric. This holding out for a hero is also not terribly far off from one of the features in a low tier environment. Right? I think in local tavern, there's What's the Talk of the Town and Mysterious Stranger. What's the Talk of the Town is more the thing that could give a mission, but you're not always going to want to feature the tavern, and you might still want somebody to introduce this. So runs up to the party with, want to give some more sense of urgency and immediacy here to this action. And what that lets GMs do is you walk into this town, the GM and the players go back and forth a little bit, like establishing the description, and the PCs, may do something, and then the GM can make the move of a villager runs up to you out of breath. Introducing a mission like that helps convey the immediacy of the situation, right? Because a lot of these different types of challenges that you might deploy are going to impact a few people in the town or the village most powerfully. And those are probably going to be the people who would be most likely to be running around looking for help, right? Or here, there's some rough and tumble looking folks walked into town, don't you know? Because we're in Fantasy Minnesota, eh? And then, they're running up and be like, you have to rescue my nephew. He's been taken by dwarven bandits or whatever. Obviously the other name for this is I Need a Hero. But I like alliteration where I can, and anyway, that's neither here nor there. This is me just quibbling with myself as part of an editorial process, effectively. So, two very different kinds of adversaries, right? Villager, right? Based on the way I've written them, I'm going to give them the social tag as well, because these actually just the social tag, because all of these features ended up being about the social fabric, right? I think this is fine as is. I could even see going down to 2 HP here. That damage is probably also fine, right? When I'm doing revision, I would level check this in terms of like the stat numbers against both my busybody adversary and other tier 1 social adversaries, just to make sure that they're not out of whack. So we've done our villager. We did our sword saint. I have one specific idea for the Grinning Legion, which is three goblins in a trench coat, but as a magic mech, right? That there's some kind of magical suit of armor, but it's being piloted by 3 people of smaller ancestries all kind of stacked up together, right? 3 halflings in a trench coat, 3 goblins in a trench coat, whatever. However you want to interpret a thing that in my mind is enough of a thing that it would count as a trope. But that is just a bit over an hour, and I have lots of things that I need to get working on that are not this. So I think we've reached a good stopping point and had some fun. I'm really happy with how we got to kind of focus on vibes and fulfilling a fantasy in making the Sword Saint. So I'm looking forward to playtesting them. And I think there's a version of this villager with, maybe a little more polish, maybe replacing one or another feature for something else that can interact with the PCs in some different way, right? Because both Misunderstanding and Social Fabric are kind of the same type of interaction, but with different triggers and circumstances. But maybe that's all they need to have, right? There's kind of a positive way to interact with them, and then there's some ways in which there can be some antagonism. But all of that said, I'm going to just toss this up as a reminder again that the best way to stay up on news about the various projects that I have in the hopper, Daggerheart related design, other game design things that I'm working on, but mostly Daggerheart related stuff, because that's just been where, right, I work on the Daggerheart core rulebook, I start doing streams, people are excited to hear what I have to say, and then that has generated a lot of, that's done a lot of good things for me. So it is the thing that I'm mostly focusing on with my design, because that is where there's the demand and where I am in the best position to address and fulfill that demand. So thank you very much to Jaybird Things, Etten Entertainment, Jumbo Chicken, NSman, Not a Hag, Alan Tucker, Adventure Lies Ahead 1, and everybody else who has been here over the course of the stream today. Thank you to everyone who is watching on VOD, whether that's on Twitch or on YouTube. You can find all of the streams that I've done with Daggerheart related design or thoughts about the game over on YouTube at youtube.com/@MikeUnderwood. And I've already given the Patreon there. So thank you all and have a good week.